The return entry icon is where items are returned back to the vendor so a credit can be applied. The word new within the return number field indicates that the system accesses the next sequential return number. For new documents, leave this field so the system increments sequentially. To recall a previously posted return, enter or select the return number. To create a new return, enter or select either a vendor number or the previously posted receipt number. If transaction history is not being saved, the receipt may not be accessible, so the return requires manual entry. If this is the case, begin by entering the vendor number. If the history is being saved, the original receipt may still be on the system, so recall it directly. When selecting an existing receipt, the items from the receipt appear within the Details section. For a return not referencing a posted receipt, optionally enter a template code to assist with the return entry process. Then enter the date of the return. The system defaults to the date Accpac was started for the return date. The posting date determines the period that transactions are updated in the general ledger. This date either defaults from the invoice date or the date Accpac was started, depending on the default posting date switch within PO options discussed earlier. The year and period corresponding to the posting date displays from the fiscal calendar. Accpac then displays the purchase order number associated with the original receipt. If a single receipt was created earlier for multiple purchase orders, the first purchase order selected appears. If a bill to address was defined on the receipt, indicating where the invoice is sent for payment, Accpac defaults to the location entered. To verify that the correct address has been selected for payment, click the Zoom blue arrow button. Then accept or enter the ship via code associated with the items being returned. The vendor account set appears from the receipt. Although this code can be changed, normally it is not changed because the account set code references the accounts payable control account, among others, that gets posted in General Ledger. Even if the account set is not changed, the account set shown here may not be the same account set that was used for the invoice. Remember, the account set may have been changed at the invoice level. Although the accounting is done correctly within the General Ledger, comparing the default control account against the vendor total may show a discrepancy. Optionally enter any description or reference information. The lower portion of the window displays the items and field values from the original receipt, if one was referenced. Although the default quantity being returned for each detail line is 0, for those items on the receipt that are not being returned, you can remove them from the list entirely by highlighting the detail line and clicking the Delete key. This way, they do not appear in the return document that gets printed. Accept or select the item number of the item being returned. Then indicate the inventory location where the item is to be removed. For returns against a specific receipt, the location code cannot be changed. For existing receipts, Accpac displays the quantity received and then the extended cost and any discounts entered on the receipt. Enter the quantity of the item being returned to the vendor. Accpac defaults this field to 0. The unit of measure defaults from the receipt. You are not able to change the unit of measure for a return being entered against an existing receipt. So if you purchase the item by the case, but only need to return one item from that case, you either need to return a fractional quantity of the case, or enter the return without referencing the receipt, and manually enter the detail lines for those items being returned. Accpac defaults the cost entered on the receipt for the unit of measure. If the user has the appropriate security rights, the cost can be changed. Be sure to enter the cost correctly associated with the unit of measure. If a discount for the item existed on the receipt, the discount entered defaults. enter or change the discount percent or amount if necessary. If tax was factored in the cost of the item on the receipt, the tax amount is displayed next. Optionally change the tax settings by clicking the Item Tax button, as discussed earlier. Once again, Accpac displays the net amount, this time factoring any taxes. The next field is the weight unit of measure. If weight is assigned to the item in inventory control, Accpac displays the weight unit of measure and the weight of the item. The extended weight is calculated by multiplying the quantity by the unit weight. If a unique vendor item number existed on the receipt, that item number appears in the vendor item number field. Next, the system displays the sales order number existing on the receipt. If the item on the receipt is non-stock, the expense account field displays the general ledger account from the receipt. In addition, if the item is a non-stock item, the non-stock clearing account entered on the receipt appears. The manufacturer's item number is displayed next, if one was entered earlier on the receipt or purchase order. The Optional Fields field is where optional fields specific to this item detail are entered. Optional fields assigned to the return as a whole are entered using the Optional Fields page. As discussed earlier, Accpac automatically calculates tax where necessary based on the tax settings established with the vendor and item. The Item Tax button is used to view or change the item side of the tax settings. The Item Tax button also allows the container section of the window to appear as one screen, so all the fields can be viewed without having to scroll left and right. If any tax settings are adjusted for the item while entering the return, click the Calculate Taxes button to have the system recalculate the new tax values. The Taxes page displays the tax settings for the vendor side of the tax calculation process. As discussed earlier, calculating taxes in purchase orders observes two components, whether the specific item is taxable and if the vendor is taxable. Purchase orders refers to the tax matrix in Common Services, discussed in the System Manager course, to determine if the item-vendor combination is taxable or not, and if it is, what the tax rate is. The item side of the matrix is determined on the Details tab using the Item Tax button, while the Taxes page here determines the vendor side of the tax calculation. The tax settings shown on this window default from how they were accepted on the receipt. If this particular return requires a tax override, make changes to the tax setting on this window. If changes are made, click the Calculate Taxes button to recalculate the tax amounts. The Optional Fields page displays any optional fields assigned to the return header section. Again, optional fields are discussed in another course. If multi-currency is installed and configured for the database, a rates page is available. This is where changes can be made to the exchange rate information if the vendor's source currency is different from the company's functional currency. The exchange rate information defaults to the receipt, if one was selected. Optionally change the rate type, date associated with the exchange rate, or the actual rate itself. The Totals page displays the Return Totals window. Optionally enter a general comment that prints on the return, and observe the total weight of the items being returned for those items where weight was entered. Also observe the return subtotal, any entered discounts, the calculated tax amount, and the return total. The bottom portion of the window contains another row of buttons. These buttons are visible from any page. Click the Post button when the return is ready to be posted. As discussed earlier, the History button inquires on previous purchases for item-vendor combinations with the ability to drill down into documents to view specific document information. When the return is complete, click the Post button to post it. You then have the option to print the return immediately or save it so it can be printed later.
Let's take a look at credit debit note entry.